We are on the Gemara in Lamed Vav Amid Beis 36b, right after the Mishnah. The Mishnah gave us various scenarios of somebody who puts an Eruv out multiple places, not knowing whether he's going to have to go east or west, and he puts an Eruv on both, and then on Shabbos will decide. Either he will decide based on something that's already there, such as his teacher is already in one town, he just doesn't know where, or his teacher is going to come on Shabbos and he's going to decide on Shabbos based on that information, and or the tax collector is going to show up on Shabbos, and based on which side they show up, he's going to run the other way. In either case, retroactively, based on some information that was not even existent yet, he's going to change and decide which Eruv is the Eruv, and that's the concept of Brera, of retroactively defining something that to be halachically present back then. And today we're going to see multiple cases of Brera and whether it applies or not, and the opinions of whether it can apply. The concept here would be, I put out an Eruv in the east, I put out an Eruv in the west. They are contradictory. If the Eruv on the east is correct, then I cannot walk out of the city at all on the west side, and vice versa. If the Eruv on the west is the one that actually takes effect, I cannot walk out on the east at all. And wherever the Eruv is, I can go 4,000 am on that side, because that's defining my space for Shabbos on either side. And yet, the opinion of Brera would be that I can on Shabbos say, right now I decide that when the onset of Shabbos came and my space was defined by the Eruv, the one on the west is what defined me, and not the one on the east, or vice versa. So first, just some technicalities in the Mishnah. It mentioned running from someone or going to someone. Who are these people? Ki hasa Rabbi Yitzchak, when Rabbi Yitzchak said Tani Ipcha, we have the opposite of our Mishnah. Kulam Mastited, where they're running from the teacher and going towards the government officials. So the Gemara says, Kasha Nacham Nacham, the non-Jews are contradiction, Kasha Chacham Chacham, and I have a contradiction of the Chacham Chacham. Nacham Nacham lekasha haba par hagavna and haba Maria Masa. Depends if it's a tax collector. Say you're running away to hide because they had the discretion to just pick on someone to pay up a huge tax, and haba Maria Masa, or if you're going to an actual government leader and you're speaking on behalf of the community, or you're going to beseech on your own behalf. And the Chacham lekasha, and the Chachamim are not a question. Ha b'moisef pirki, ha b'mikru shema. It depends whether it is a moisef pirki, which is someone who is teaching the adults, and ha b'mikru shema, or if it is the teacher for the children. So a teacher for the children, Rashi says you would be running away from. And because they're teaching the children to daven. Now, why would you be running away from them? Either you didn't have the money to pay the tuition, or it doesn't mean that you're running away. It means you're going the other way for the teacher that's in the other city. That's not the town you need to go, because that's where they're teaching children. In either case, the concept of this case is where, as opposed to where the Chacham is already in one of the towns and I simply don't know which, and I'm putting an Eruv on either side, in order that when I get the information of where he already is, that Eruv will be valid. Here, I'm actually there is no information at this point. What's going to happen on Shabbos will define the Eruv retroactively. So Rabbi Yehuda says if one of them was his teacher, his main teacher, so then he's going to go there. And the Rabbanan say, no, sometimes he'd rather go to he'd rather go with friends to the other teacher than to go to his primary teacher. Amar Rav leisel masnit. Rav said this is all nice in our Mishnah, but our Mishnah is not halacha. We're not going to follow our Mishnah, which is an unattributed statement in regards to brera working. Meditani Ayo, because Ayo actually taught the reverse in regards to brera, and we're going to say that it doesn't work. The Tani Ayo, because Ayo said, Rabbi Yehuda said, "In other masna shnei dvarim kechad." A person cannot make a contradictory condition at once. You cannot make an Eruv on the east and an Eruv on the west and say, I will decide which one it is. If he had stated that he had placed the Eruv if the Chacham was already on the east, so then that would work. But if they are contradictory, it won't work. So so why does he say that if he's going to choose later, he's going to say, I'm putting an Eruv on the east and an Eruv on the west, and I'll figure it out later? That doesn't work. The Ein Breira, because you say you cannot retroactively define which is your space for Shabbos and Eruv, and the valid Eruv, and because at the time you set it up, you also set a contradictory one on the other side. So also, when he puts one out on either side and says, look, wherever my teacher is, that's the one that's good, it also shouldn't work. No, there's a difference. There, the Chacham is already there in the other side, in one side. I simply don't know. I'm lacking information, but it is already defined at the onset of Shabbos. At the onset of Shabbos, when the Eruv needs to define my space, it does. I don't know what it defines because I don't know where the Chacham is, but it already defines my space because the Chacham is already in the town on the east. I just don't know whether he's on the east or the west, and so I put an Eruv either way. But he's already there at the onset of Shabbos. At the onset of Shabbos, when my Eruv needs to define my space and work, it's already there. It's already defined to those who know. I simply don't know about it. Whereas over here, and where I put out an Eruv on both sides and say wherever whatever happens tomorrow, which will tell me where I need to go, that's where I'm going to decide. So there, that's only happening on Shabbos itself. At the onset of Shabbos, when the Eruv has to define my space, it's undefined. It's still not known where the Chacham is going to go, where the tax collector is going to come from. And therefore, that's not valid. So Gemara says, even though that Rav said that we're going to follow the opinion of Ayo and not the opinion of our Mishnah, and it's not going to be valid if you put a contradictory Eruv on either side, and it's not yet defined at the onset of Shabbos. Nevertheless, we're going to say that actually we don't follow the opinion of Ayo on account of that we have a Mishnah contradicting Ayo. Adrabah, leisel Ayo, memasnitin. So because in our Mishnah we see that not like Aya. So why are you choosing Aya over our Mishnah? Gemara says actually, the reason why Rab said we're going to follow Aya rather than our Mishnah is because we have a concurring Mishnah to Aya in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanan we learned. And here we go to Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph 37a. If somebody buys wine that right now needs to have tithe, so he buys some wine, and Rashi deals with the question of buying wine from a non-Jew because you're not allowed to have wine that a non-Jew pressed because they would use it for libations. You use it for ceremonies of religious ceremonies of sanctification to their deities. In any case, so somebody buys some wine,
Does this kusim for sake of the censor, or kusim like they were actually Kuthites? And if so, do we assume Kuthites are the Avodah Zarah?
Yes, Kutites were idolaters, as the Gemara says. They had the Dmus Yona. They had a dove image on top of the mountains in Shomron, and they were idolaters. And the Tanah we learned, somebody buys wine from amongst the Kutites, and Omer, and now he needs to separate the tithes. So he has to tithe over here. So he says, now he wants to drink, and he doesn't have another vessel to keep the teruma and the maaser, etc. So he says, Omer shnei lugin shani asid lahafrish. The two measures that I'm going to separate later on. Harehe teruma, that's going to be the teruma. That is the teruma now. Asara and the 10%, which I'm going to separate later into a separate jug. Maaser rishon, that's the first type. And Tisha, and the 9% of the current, meaning 10% of what remains, is the second tithe, Maaser Sheni. And they are effective now, because I have to be able to drink now, but I'm only going to define them later by putting them into separate jugs. So you can do that, and then redeem it onto a coin. And he can drink right away, Rabbi Meir. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Now the text of this Mishnah reads, however, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, they say, Usr, and it doesn't work, you're not allowed to do it. So we now have Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you cannot do Breira. And in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that you can do Breira. So we have Ayo says, no, our Mishnah is incorrect. And we have another Mishnah concurring with Ayo that actually says that our Mishnah text is incorrect. However, Ula says Leisala Ayo. No, actually it's incorrect. Ayo is incorrect. And our Mishnah is correct that there is Breira. And Rabbi Yehuda would agree. And so why do we have a text in the case of the wine, where he's separating the wine? Later we'll actually separate the wine, but now he's designating the wine, and later when he separates it, it'll define what he had currently separated, or designated. Because actually, even though that the text of the Mishnah reads, Rabbi Meir says it works, and the three, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, say that it does not work, actually it's the other way around. It's 2 and 2. And Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both say it is going to work, because Rabbi Yehuda says Breira, and he says so in our Mishnah as well. That what it actually, they were in pairs, and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda say it's okay, and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say it's not okay. Divrei Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, comma Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi and Shimon say that it does not work. You cannot do such a breira separation of Truma and Maaser. Now the Gemara says, wait, but you're saying that Rabbi Yossi says it does not work in regards to wine. V'sav Rabbi Yossi ein breira. Is Rabbi Yossi really of the opinion that we cannot say breira, that you cannot retroactively define what happened halachically beforehand? But to now we learned Rabbi Yossi, and this is going to seem to say Rabbi Yossi does say that there is a concept of breira. Again, in our Mishnah, we have Rabbi Yehuda says there is breira. You can define where your Eruv is going to be. Or really where later you can define where your Eruv was at the onset of Shabbos. We have in regards to the wine, and where you're not going to physically separate the wine until later, but you're designating it now, and later you're going to separate, and it'll work as the designated wine from the beginning. That's Rabbi Meir says it works. Ula says Rabbi Yehuda also says it works. And Rabbi Yossi, and both agree that Rabbi Yossi says it does not work. Yet Rabbi Yossi is going to say in these next two cases that it does work retroactively. You could say Breira. Vatanan we learned in the Mishnah. The halacha is that mechusri kapara, there are certain obligations that somebody would have that after they were tamei, they have to then come and, besides for going to the mikveh, they have to bring 2 birds as a chatas and an ola, as a sin offering and a scent offering. And when those are brought, it has to be brought with the intent of them as the owner. Otherwise, it doesn't work for them. Now, 2 women come, and they both gave birth, and they're postpartum. They're bringing their carbon, the 2 birds. Now if they had designated one as a chatas and one as an ola, and then the next one designated there's one as a chatas, one as an ola, you're up in for trouble, because if the kohen mixes any of it up, it's all going to be invalid. So what they did was they brought it to the kohen and they said, "You define for us which one is mine and which one is a kohen, which one is a chatas, which one is an ola." Tanan Rabbi Yossi says, "Shtei nashim, 2 women, shalakhu es kineim be'iruv." They purchased their birds, literally the nests, meaning a set of 2 birds. They bought it themselves. They bought it as a mix, meaning they went in and they said, "Give us 4 birds," and they bought it together. Or they gave it together to the kohen. So Eza Sheyirtza Kohen Yaakov. Eza Sheyirtza Yaakov Chatas. The Kohen can take the 2 that one brought and they make it both as an Ola, 1 for each. And take the 2 that the other one brought and make them both a Chatas, 1 for each. And so you see that retroactively he's defining what each one gave them and what it was for. Rabba Hasam Kishehisni. Rabba says, no, there the reason is not because generally you can affect something like that retroactively. Rather, there it was the condition they made. When they designated these birds, they said, whatever the kohen wants, he can define them. We're giving you the 4 birds, and you define what's mine, what's my friend's, and what's my scent offering, and what's my sin offering, what's my ola, what's my chatas. Amar Rabba Hasam Kashehisnu. The Gemara says, where it says, well, if that was the condition they made, so why do I even need a Mishnah for that? Obviously, if somebody comes and says, Kohen, here are 4 birds, 2 of them are for my friend, 2 of them are for me, you define which 2, you define which one is the sin offering, which one is the scent offering, which is the chatas, which is the ola, let it be.
What, they had 4 birds altogether?
Correct.
2 apiece? So they didn't, so the Kohen doesn't know, the Kohen may have taken, in other words, Leah's got 2 and Rachel's got 2. The Kohen doesn't know that one oila has to be Leah, a Leah bird, and one oila has to be a Rachel bird. He may have taken 2 of Leah's birds and made them 1 oila for Rachel and 1 oila for Leah, and then it really would be Breira.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
That's not a problem because they made that condition with them. You could define my birds to be whatever
but
you want.
They're their birds, but they're their birds. They're going to come out that one has 2 oilas and one has 2 chatas.
No, because they're telling the Kohen, you define which is mine, and you define which is my ola, my ascent offering, and you define which is my chatas, my sin offering. You define them. Here are 4 birds. You define them, but it's not breira because it was never defined beforehand.
But the operative word here is my. They gave him 4 birds. He said these are 2 chatas, these are 2 oilas. Turns out the 2 chatas both belong to Leah.
They didn't both belong to Leah because who defined them as Leah's?
Well, so when they bought the 4 birds, they belong to both of them. So then either way, you're going to have to attribute one to one and one to the other. Either way. Correct.
And what's the problem with that? They made that condition when they purchased it or when they gave it to him. You define it, whatever you want.
Either way, it's going to be Breira.
That's not Breira. That's not retroactive. That's currently, right now. I'm giving you this and you define it as you wish. That's not retroactive. That's now. I let you, Kohen, define which is mine. We bought something together.
They had no individual ownership.
They didn't need to have individual ownership until the time the carbon is becoming effective. And at that point, he's defining it. Okay. Breira is a retroactive.
John is shaking his head too.
Breira is a retroactive definition. It isn't a current. Current definitions are fine. Breira is a retroactive definition, meaning I have a barrel 100 liters of wine. I'm separating 10 liters, and I'm gonna drink as much as I want. Whatever remains is going to be the 10 liters that that are my maser. So that's a retroactive definition. In 5 days from now, when I finish this barrel of wine and I have 10 liters left, that's what's going to define what was my 10 liters of maser at the onset. At midday Shabbos, when the rabbi shows up in the other town, that's what's going to define retroactively, 16 hours back, what was my place for Shabbos.
Maybe he has another analogy. If you at a restaurant and the two of you and you both order the same thing, the waiter brings it and he says, here's yours, here's yours. He's defined whose is whose.
Right, and that's at the moment, not retroactive.
Right, at the moment.
Right, it's at the moment. So that's what the Kohen is doing, saying right now, because they gave him the right to say, look, we purchased this together. We haven't paid yet, or we've paid together. So you define which are my two birds, and you define which are her two birds. Right. I'm okay with that. Here's a set of 4.
Okay, Steve's analogy. So I took 2. So you and I went to a restaurant. We brought 2 steaks that we had bought jointly. Okay. The waiter comes out and says, "This one's yours. This one's yours."
Yeah.
That's Breira.
No, that's not retroactive. That's current. I'm selling to you this piece now, and I'm selling to you this piece now. The Kohen is defining it now. It doesn't have any definition prior to that. It doesn't need a definition prior to that. It doesn't need a definition prior to that. So it's true. It may have been the 2 birds that I handed to the Kohen, but it doesn't need a definition as mine. I'm allowing the Kohen to say that's what the Gemara is saying. It's like, Mila, remember, what's the big chiddush? Why do you even need to say this? Of course, if I tell the Kohen, you define whether these are mine or hers, you define whether this is a ola or a chatas, go ahead. So if that's the case, what's even the question? There's no brayer, nothing going on. I'm just telling the Kohen, you define what it is, which is a great system. It's the least confusing and least chance of something going bad. But it's not. I don't need to tell you that works. That's obvious.
But when it comes to a korban, it has to be mine. I have to bring my korban. Okay.
It has to be with the intent of for me. It has to be with the intent for me, and it has to be that if it is mine, that I designated, it cannot go for someone else. That's true. But if I didn't designate it yet, so I allow the Kohen to designate it as mine. And so the Kohen says, this is yours. Fine.
Okay.
So the Gemara says, Karav Chisda. This is like the teaching of Rav Chisda. The Amar Rav Chisda, Ein Kinin Misparshos. These birds do not become designated as belonging to a particular person, or as designated as the chatas or as the ola, meaning which korban they're for. Go to 37b. Only at the moment of purchase, the owner can define it. So if I'm purchasing these 2 birds, I can say this is the chatas, this is the ola, or the kohen at the moment of sacrifice, as the verses indicate, because the Torah says, and you will acquire 2 birds, one as an ola, one as a chatas. And it says, and the Kohen will make them one as a chatas and one as an ola. So we see that the definition of which is a chatas, which is the ola, can happen either when I purchase them, or when the Kohen makes them. And so, other than that, it's not going to be defined. So the Gemara says, okay, so there the reason is not because of Breira, but rather it actually is to teach us that the Kohen has the right to make that definition, and it actually is one of the two times that definition would take effect. Fine, but we have another place where it seems Rabbi Yossi says that there's a concept of Breira. Vatani, we learned. Ama Aretz Sha'ama Lechaver. Somebody who's not strict in regards to tithing tells someone who is strict in regards to tithing, Kachli Aguda Achashal Yerek. Gluska achas. Well, you go into the marketplace, you go into the farmer's market, do me a favor, purchase a bundle of this type of vegetable for me. And so the chaver who's careful with tithing goes to the market and buys himself one and buys one for his friend. Now, when he buys it for the friend, if he's buying it first for himself, he purchased both. If he purchased them both, and then it's considered then when he comes back to his friend, then he gives him one. He's essentially selling his friend something that's his. He has to tithe it before he gives it to the friend. He's obligated not to let something out of his hand that's untithed, so he's going to have to tithe it. However, if what's happening when he gives it to his friend is that retroactively it's defined what he purchased when he purchased it, that it was for his friend, so then he doesn't have to tithe it. So Rabbi Yossi said he doesn't have to tithe it because even though he paid for both, and so he essentially acquired both, and then when he hands one off to his friend, he's reselling it, if you would, to his friend. Rabbi Yossi says no. All he's doing is retroactively defining his acquisition. I acquired one for myself and one for my friend. Which one? I don't know. The one I hand to my friend is the one that retroactively was his. The Chachamim say actually you do have to tithe because you can't retroactively define which is yours, and therefore you are selling. You purchase both, and you're selling one to your fellow, and so you have to tithe it before you give it to him. So we see Rabbi Yossi says Breira, and then in the wine manner, we see that he says that you can't retroactively define which wine is the maaser, the tithe. The Gemara says epoch. So we have to switch it around, and we have to say that Rabbi Yossi is the one that says that you have to tithe the bundle that you bought for your friend, and the Chachamim are the one that say that you can retroactively define which was your bundle of produce and which was for your friend, and therefore you don't have to tithe it because you're not reselling it, but rather you're just defining which one you purchased for. Tashama. So let's come in here from this. I have another where it seems Rav Yossi says that there's a breira that you could retroactively define. Somebody puts a hand in his pocket to get a coin, and he says the tithe that I have in my hand should be transferred or redeemed onto the coin that I'm going to pick. I'm just going to pick one of my coins, and this should be redeemed on that. And then he picks it up. He picks a coin, so it works. Even though he didn't have a coin in his hand at the time that he made the redemption and made the switch onto the coin, nevertheless it works. We see that, and he had other coins in his pocket. So we see that he can define retroactively which coin was the redeemer a moment ago. Rabbi Yossi says it works. So you see Rabbi Yossi says, Breira, that you can retroactively define something. Epoch. Here too we're going to have to say Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't work. The Gemara says, wait. We have one statement by wine where there's a machlokes. Rabbi Meir and perhaps even Rabbi Yehuda says that it does work. You can retroactively define which was the wine that was tithed. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say it doesn't work. And there you're going to keep that brisa as is. Yet multiple brises where that Mishnah you're going to keep as is, but multiple brises where Rabbi Yossi says that you can do breira, you can retroactively define which was your produce and which one you bought for your friend, or you can retroactively define which coin was the one that you made the redemption with. Each one of those you say, oh no, you have to switch that around. That's actually not the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, you're saying that Rabbi Yossi holds that it does not work. You cannot transfer on that coin because you didn't have it defined when you made the transfer. Why is it that you're switching the two statements of Rabbi Yossi and saying that it's not valid when you could just switch to one and say Rabbi Yossi agrees that the wine is predetermined, it can be retroactively determined as which is the wine that's tied, and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi would say it's a good, it works, and only Rabbi Shimon is the one that says that it doesn't work in retroactively defining your wine. Why don't you switch that one out in front of these two? So the Gemara says, no, because actually, if you look at this brisa itself, you're going to have to say that Rabbi Yossi holds that the coin cannot be retroactively defined as the coin you're switching your maser onto. You have to have it defined beforehand, because the end of that brisa indicates that. The Ktani Seifo, because at the end of the brisa says, Rabbi Yossi will agree when somebody says, "Oh, the tithe I have in my house." Will be defined, will be transferred onto the new coin, which I have in my pocket, and he only has one coin in his pocket, so that's going to work. Shechile, so that works. Now, since Rabbi Yossi says that he has a new coin, meaning a defined coin, that it works, if the previous statement also worked, so then what I need to say that? In other words, the brisa, the text we have, says like this. Rabbi Yossi says, if I have a whole wallet full of coins, I have a money pouch full of coins, and I say, I'm transferring the tithe onto whichever coin comes out of my pocket, and I pick one up, it works. And Rabbi Yossi agrees that if I have only one coin in my pocket, or I define it and say I'm talking about the new coin, and he only has one, then it works. Well, that's self-contradictory. You just said it works even if there are multiple coins there. And then you say, oh, and Rabbi Yossi agrees that it works even if I only have, when I have one coin. So we see that the text is wrong. And what makes more sense within the text is this way. You have multiple coins, and you say whichever one I pick up is going to be the one this is transferred on. It doesn't work because it's not predetermined. It's not predefined. However, Rabbi Yossi agrees. If you define it, you have a whole bunch of coins, but you define it and say the new coin is the one I'm transferring onto. Even though there are many coins there, but there's only one new one, it'll work. So we see Rabbi Yossi does not hold breira. The text itself indicates that the first section of the brisa is a mistaken text. Since he says that it works in regards to this case where he defined the coin, which indicates at the beginning part of the brisa, it did not work. Now the Gemara says, when he said the new coin, what's it talking about? Are there multiple coins there? 2, 3 coins? That 2 would be breira, right? And so then what? That's exactly the same as the beginning. Must be that we're talking about that there's only one coin there, and that's where Rabbi Yossi agrees that it works. So my tala. So why? Of course it works. I did the Tani Reisha Tala, Tani Nami Sefer Tala. The word Tala means generally that it was chosen, it was elevated, it was predetermined already. He said that's the one. He chose it. So you're right. It means that he just because at the beginning he said that it doesn't work, it does not elevate it amongst the rest because it's not predetermined. Over here he says it does elevate from amongst the rest, even though there's only one new coin. Amalei Rav Rav Nachman, Man Haitana, Dafila Rabbanan Lesei Breira. Whose opinion is it that even in rabbinic manners there is no breira? After all, in an Eruv, it should work because even if you say on a Torah level it has to be predetermined and there's no breira, perhaps for rabbinic matters, like putting out an Eruv, I should be allowed to predetermine. I should be allowed to on Shabbos retroactively determine where my eruv was, because that's a rabbinic matter. And whose opinion is it that even for rabbinic matters, even for D'Rabbanans, I cannot say Breira? The Tani we learned. Amar lachamisha. And how do we know that for rabbinic matters it doesn't work? Because somebody says to 5 people, Hareini ma'arev alezim akem she'eretze. Somebody says, look, I'm going to travel to the other city and I'm putting out an eruv for myself because I want to go to the Chacham. But I'm not sure, I want somebody to walk with me. I'm not sure now which one of you I want. So I'm going to put a second eruv out, and tomorrow I'm going to determine which one of you I'm interested in walking with. If I want, then you can come along because you have an eruv, and if not, not. So the Gemara says that would only work if prior to Shabbos he determined who he's going with. But once Shabbos set in, and then he wants to determine who the eruv is for, ein eruv, the eruv won't work. So we see that even in a rabbinic matter of defining who the eruv is for, it's not going to work in Breira. I can't retroactively define who the eruv is for. And it has to be that I decided prior to Shabbos. So Rav Nachman did not respond to Rava to tell him whose opinion this is. So Gemara says, why? Why didn't you say that this is the teaching of Ayah, which we saw earlier? He didn't have the teaching of Ayah. And so Rashi says, meaning he didn't know that Ayah would be talking about even rabbinic matters, because all the cases that we saw earlier were Torah matters. We had tithing, Maaser, which is a Torah matter. We have the 2 birds, a Torah matter. So the transfer of Maaser onto a coin, a Torah matter. But over here, creating an Eruv, we didn't know that Ayah would say the same. Rav Yosef Amatanoi Shaklas Me'alma. Tanoi, Rav Yosef says, what? You're forgetting the machlokas about this matter? It's a machlokas Tanoim. The Tani will learn Hareini ma'arev l'shabbosis shel kol hashana. I'm making an eruv for all of the for every Shabbos for the year. Okay, he's putting out a food that will last for the rest of the year. And puts out a box of matzah to the east, a box of matzah to the west. It's going to last there. Retzisi elich, lo retzisi le'elich. If I want, I'll go to the east. If I don't want, I keep my space for Shabbos here, and then I can go out to the west side as well. So I put it out in the east, and then I can decide, you know what, this Shabbos I don't want the Eruv, and then I could go to the west, 2,000 Amma. So if somebody makes such an Eruv, if he decides prior to Shabbos, so then it works. But if he didn't decide before Shabbos, so there Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon says, nevertheless, the Eruv is going to work because he can do Breira. The Chachamim say, Ein Eruv. He cannot do Breira. So now we see that even in a matter of rabbinics, like over here, which is the Eruv, Rabbi Shimon says the Eruv works, and the Chachamim say it doesn't work. Gemara says, wait, Rabbi Shimon less than Breira. But in the matter of wine, where somebody purchased wine and he didn't have a jug to put his tithe in and his truma in and the second tithe in, so he said, whatever I'm going to separate later should be defined now as my tithes. There, Rabbi Shimon says it does not work. So why over here does he say by the Eruv it does work? Kasha, the Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon. So we have a contradiction. Rabbi Shimon itself, so we're going to have to switch it around and say that Rabbi Shimon is the one that says that you cannot define your Eruv. If you put out an Eruv for the rest of the year, you cannot define it on Shabbos. It has to be defined before each Shabbos, whether you're using the Eruv or not. And the Chachamim are the ones that say, no, you can define it on Shabbos, whether you're going to use it or not. In any case, the Gemara says, why do you have to switch it around and say that Rabbi Shimon of the wine will disagree, Rabbi Shimon that says that for wine it doesn't work, will say that for the Eruv it does work. Maybe that's true. My kasha dilmaki less Rabbi Shimon breira b'doraisa v'dorabanan islay breira. Maybe Rabbi Shimon says wine separating the tithes, that's a Torah obligation. You can't retroactively define that. Eruv, putting your Eruv out to travel 2,000 amma outside of the city on the other side, that's a rabbinic matter. To define your Shabbos space within the limit of 2,000 amma is rabbinic, and therefore you're allowed to put the Eruv there and define it on Shabbos, whether you're relying it on it or not. So Gemara says no. The Rav Yosef didn't want to say this because Kasavar Rav Yosef is of the opinion, man the islay breira, if you hold to the concept of breira that you can retroactively define a halachic matter, then it makes no difference whether it's a Torah obligation or a rabbinic mitzvah. Either way, you can halachically define retroactively your space. And if you cannot, and if you hold that no, there is no such halachic concept of tomorrow defining what's your space today, of tomorrow defining what's your tithe within this mixture, etc. If you can't do breira, you can't retroactively define a halachic matter, so l'shno b'doraisa, l'shno b'dorabanan, it won't work even in a rabbinic matter, and for sure not doraisa. Rava says, actually, no, we don't have to switch, and we can make a distinction between the two, and it's not based on rabbinics or Darabana Daraisa, whether it's a rabbinic matter or not. Could be that Rabbi Shimon holds that there's no breira, that there is breira everywhere. You can retroactively define your halachic matter. Besides for in teruma, besides for in the tithes, because there's a specific obligation. The Torah says rashis. It has to be your first. It has to be separated. You have to be able to recognize the separation from the remainder. Shiny hasam to be in a rashis shireh nekarim. You have to have rashis. You have to have the first of your crop. You have to have something that's defined as a beginning, which means that you have it separated from the rest. So Rava says Rabbi Shimon is a very local conversation. It's not, Rabbi Shimon agrees to the concept of breira throughout the halacha. It's only in regards to teruma and maaser where he says, look, there specifically the obligation is that you have to, it only counts as teruma if you can recognize the tithe away from the remainder. Abaya says, if that's the case, so Abaye says, if that's the case, if he had in front of him two non-tithed pomegranates, and he makes sort of like a bet. If the rain falls, well, it comes today, so then the one on the right is going to be truma for the one on the left. And if the rain doesn't come, so then the one on the left will be truma for the one on the right. The end of klum. You're going to tell me that doesn't work. After all, you can't tell which one is the remainder and which one is a separation. And if you tell me, okay, yeah, perhaps, so Rabbi Shimon says it doesn't work. But Tanan, we learned truma sakri, that the separation of a pile of grains, the teruma of this pile, and the tithes, or trumas maaser, and the 10% that the Levi has to give out of the 10% that you give to the Levi. Rabbi Shimon says he can define it that way because he's doing it now. It's not retroactive. He's doing it now, even though that he hasn't separated it physically. So there, it's different because you can actually tell there is the truma on that end, and the remainder is here. That would work where he says, either one of these is going to be, and I don't know which one, and some other matter is going to decide it. So that is actually not going to work because because it's undefined. So tomorrow we'll get back to this last case of Abaye's question of Rabbi Shimon and go and continue. Sorry, we're out of time to get to the Mishnah.